Good morning, everyone. Namani. My name is Dr. Corinne Green. I am a lecturer in academic development in the Teaching and Learning Innovation Unit at Adelaide University, and it's my great pleasure to be hosting this particular breakfast session with the Adelaide University and Australian Awards for University Teaching and Learning Breakfast Series. I would like to start by saying Nadlu Tampanti, Nadlu Ghana Yata Kantikanti. I am joining you from Ghana country, as I believe are our presenters today as well, and also to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the Bangala and Boandik peoples on which our university campuses are based. Ghana country in particular has been an area of conferences and joining together and coming to learn together for 60,000 years. So it's a great privilege to be able to continue in that today. And we do extend that acknowledgement to wherever you are joining us from across these lands now called Australia. Today, we are going to be hearing from three esteemed colleagues of mine. We have Dr. Elissa Pearson, we have Dr. Amanda Richardson, and Dr. Brianna Busque. Speaking with us about building real-world skills in first-year psychology education, enhancing student wellbeing through fostering connection with nature in a fully online course. So I'm very excited to hear from these three about what they have to share with us today. Elissa Pearson is an Associate Professor of Psychology and led the design and development of the Connecting and Working with Nature course in partnership with Amanda Richardson, drawing on her expertise in conservation psychology, learning and teaching in higher education, and extensive training and professional experience in nature-based pedagogy and practices. Dr. Amanda Richardson is a lecturer in academic development that led the design of the Connecting and Working with Nature course, applying scholarly approaches to curriculum and assessment design to create an engaging online experience. She ensured constructive alignment across learning outcomes, assessment tasks, and activities, with a focus on authentic assessment and clear rubrics. Amanda and Elissa worked in close collaboration, leaning into each other's expertise to develop a cohesive, student-centred course grounded in evidence-based practice. And Dr. Brianna Busque is an educator in the human dimensions of environmental issues and expert in conservation psychology, and was the online course facilitator responsible for coordinating the online teaching team, supporting student learning in the Connecting and Working with Nature course when it launched. Her leadership was key in creating an engaging student experience, cultivating a rich learning community, and empowering the teaching staff to model nature connection while teaching in the course. So I'm very excited to hear from these three today, and we will be having some Q&A at the end. So as we go through, please do add any questions or comments that you have into the chat as we go, and we'll be facilitating that Q&A session after the presentation. But for now, I'd like to hand over to you three and hear what you have to say.
Thank you so much for a lovely introduction, Corinne, and good morning, everyone. So we're going to be sharing with you a little bit about the process of putting together this course that we were fortunate to receive the AAUT award for last year. And we're also going to talk to you a little bit about our journey in terms of building a profile of evidence and engaging in scholarship of teaching and learning research as well. So I hope you'll find it interesting and useful for your own context as well. Next slide, please, Brie. We'd also like to, we've gone to. I also just wanted to add to Corinne's fantastic acknowledgement of country to say that we're all joining you from the lands of the Ghana people and acknowledge them as the traditional owners of the lands on which we work and study here in Adelaide, and recognise their ongoing connections to these lands, skies and waters, and pay our respects to elders past and present. And I'd also like to extend that acknowledgement to the lands upon which you're all joining us from today. These lands have always been places of learning, inquiry, and knowledge sharing, and we hope to continue that tradition through our work. So a little bit about the challenge and how the Connecting and Working with Nature course came to be. So this was a course, it's located within a psychology degree, but it's actually an open elective across our university. So it's a course that we wanted to be accessible to students, not just from psychology. But one of the reasons we were putting this course together within a psychology program is because we know that a lot of psychology students don't actually go on to become psychologists. So the training pathway in psychology is such that a lot of students do an undergraduate degree in psychology, but because of constraints in terms of how many postgraduate supervisory places are available for students, not a lot of students, probably 80 up to 80%, don't go on to become practicing psychologists. And so what that means is a lot do undergrads in psychology. They learn a lot about the theory and the science of psychology, but then don't necessarily go on to practice. And we wanted to look at how can we give them a richer tool set and make their learning more applied so they can take that with them out into the very professional context they work in, whether that's working in the helping professions or a whole bunch of other industries that those undergraduate psychology students go out into as well. So our challenge was kind of how do we foster something called psychological literacy, this capacity to actually connect the learning to the real world early. And in psychology, there's always been a bit of a tension around that because we don't want undergraduate students going beyond the training that they have and thinking that they can actually engage in psychotherapy and those kinds of things. So we'd had this sort of historical, very heavy emphasis on theory first and then practical skills and application later. And we wanted to challenge how do we bring more application early, but in a way that's safe and appropriate for the level of training and the knowledge and skills that students have in the early years, the foundational years of their training. And so we really wanted to try and bridge that gap between academic learning and real world skills and real life for our students. And the other thing that was sort of happening that we were noticing across the higher education sector more broadly, but also perhaps exacerbated within the discipline of psychology, is we were seeing increasing levels of stress and also psychological distress in our students. So we know that a lot of our current higher education learners are managing their own mental health challenges, and we wanted to look at how can we constructively teach them things around well-being, around managing their own psychological health whilst they're going through their studies and empower them to use those skills to support them to succeed academically as well in the higher education environment. So, and as I said, the training pathway is very challenging and complex for psychology students. So we knew that in psychology, those feelings of stress and etc. can be amplified. Next slide, thanks, Bree. Okay, so we had a pretty rare opportunity, and I do acknowledge we were very lucky to have this opportunity. A lot of psychology training is quite prescribed by our accrediting body. There's certain things that we have to cover. We had a really great opportunity here where we could design a course that we sort of had open slather to design in the way that we thought would best address some of these needs. So it was in the context of moving our on-campus psychology program to fully online. We did have an existing third-year specialist course on conservation psychology. So conservation psychology looks at the relationships between people and the natural world, as well as how we can make them more sustainable. So the third-year course looked a lot at how we can apply psychological principles to changing people's behaviours and encouraging more pro-environmental behaviours. What we wanted to do with this one was look at the other dimension of conservation psychology, that human relationships with the natural world side of things, and how that can be used to enhance people's well-being and also to create more healthier human nature relationships, if you like. So we actually had an opportunity here to innovate and try and offer a point of differentiation for our program. So we were really fortunate to have the freedom, I guess, to try something different here. So there was a lot of inspiration that we drew upon in how we came up with this course. One of them was the science of wellbeing at Yale that some of you may be familiar with. So around the time we were developing this course, which was around 2020, that course had really blown up. So Professor Laurie Santos had delivered it on campus. It had become like the most popular course at Yale and had subsequently been developed into an online course, which I think has now had 4 or 5 million enrollments. And that course used a similar design principle to what we did, where students are learning about psychological theories and evidence around evidence-based practices for supporting your well-being, and then they implement it and they get to kind of test the science within the context of their own lives. And we thought, what a great foundation that is to do something similar, but what if we could do it with a bit of a nature connection focus? So that was kind of one of the key inspirations for this. There was also a lot of work happening in our discipline of psychology at the time as well to say that we should be teaching psychological literacy early. We shouldn't be doing this theory first, application later model. We need to be teaching students how they can apply their learning to their own lives, to their own well-being, but also in professional and in more societal contexts as well. And there was some great work being done in terms of how we could teach students skills around improving their own learning, around fostering resilience. So again, it was sort of drawing on these threads, but connecting them in a new way with nature connection as the focus. And of course, drawing on a huge body of literature as well, which speaks to the benefits of experiential learning. So these were some of the key kind of influences that shaped how we approach the Connecting and Working with Nature course design. And so that's how the Connecting and Working with Nature course was born, with a vision to equip students with practical psychological knowledge and skills to actually support students' psychological well-being, to have a real focus on how students could implement what they were learning in their own lives. And if we got it right, we hoped that that would lead to enhanced student well-being. And then the other goal was obviously to foster meaningful connections with the natural world. So we had a very strong focus on how psychological connection with nature and enhanced physical contact and time spent in natural environments can support human health and well-being, but we also really wanted that to be reciprocal. So we didn't want it to be, what can we take from nature to support student well-being? It was very much around how do we change the way we think about and relate to the natural world to create healthier and more harmonious human-nature relationships for the benefit of people and planet. Thanks, Brie. So the Connecting and Working with Nature course draws on a really wide body of research, which supports that both contact with nature, so obviously spending time in nature, having plants inside offices, having pictures of nature on walls, listening to natural sounds, all of those kinds of things are beneficial for our physical and psychological health. But because the course is situated in psychology, we also had a strong focus too on psychological connectedness with nature. And that's about how we view and relate to the natural world and is quite distinct from time in nature. And it actually offers a whole bunch of additional benefits to people's health and well-being by having a deep and meaningful sense of connectedness and belonging to the natural world. So we've focused on both of those elements within the course. And as I said, we know from the science as well that in and of itself should generate more sustainable human-nature relationships. So we were really conscious of that. Thanks, Brie. I think there's one more point. Yeah. So as we've said, we had a dual emphasis on the development of theoretical understanding alongside the application of that learning for students. So we didn't want to just teach them the science. We wanted to teach them the science and then have them experience that so they could have that kind of feedback loop about, whoa, am I feeling some of those changes in my body, in my physiology that the science is speaking to? So this is the 4 pillars that the Connecting and Working with Nature course was designed around. The theories and evidence pillar was really important. It was actually interesting. We had some people when they first started the course say, oh, I thought this was going to be really hippie and tree hugging. And, I was surprised how robust the science was that backed up what we were doing in the course. So that was important to us that we could talk to students about things like biophilia, about stress reduction or attention restoration or evidence-based pathways to enhance psychological connectedness to nature. So they could see that there's a real science around what we were doing in the course. At the same time, we also acknowledged and honored that there's a lot of ancient wisdom and practice around the importance of nature connection for human health and well-being too. And so there's that nice coming together now of traditional ways of knowing and being and doing and the more Western scientific approaches as well in terms of understanding how important this is to people's well-being. And so a key pillar of the course was really unpacking some of those theories and the research evidence and contemporary science, But connected to that was the nature connection practices that students would go out and do every week. So we were really intentional about trying to pick a practical experiential activity that students could do that connected to the theories and evidence they were learning about that week. And so sometimes they were things like a sit spot, which is sort of a form of mindfulness in nature. Sometimes it was connecting into bird song. Sometimes it was journaling, and whatever the experiences were that they were doing that week, it sort of loosely connected to the type of theories and evidence we were presenting at the same time. And so we really wanted that close connection between learn the science, do it, experience it, and then reflect on what does that mean for your learning? What are you experiencing? Is that consistent with the theories and evidence that have been presented? And it also created a lot of engagement, which Brie can probably speak to further, in terms of students could then share, regardless of where they were located in Australia, because this was a fully online course, they could share what they were seeing, noticing, feeling. We used online Padlets to enable students to be able to do that. And so, yeah, it was very tangible, I guess, and experiential, the learning in this course. And then the other dimension that was really important to us is we wanted them to have an opportunity, regardless of their disciplinary background, to see how professionals were engaging with nature in different ways. And so we had, social workers and occupational therapists and early childhood educators and a whole host of different professionals that work and engage with nature in different ways in the helping professions as well, showcase a little bit of the work that they were doing too, so students could see how this was relevant in a professional context as well as within the context of their own lives. Thanks, Brie. So in the last slide, I made it look really nice and neat and clean, but this is the sort of behind the scenes of what it looked like in the early phases of trying to pull those different threads together. And I was incredibly grateful to have Amanda's support from a teaching and learning point of view, just to try and line up how do we mirror up the kind of the theory, the evidence, the nature connection practices, how students would be applying it, and obviously trying to make sure that we had logical progression across weeks, but also consistency within weeks. So this is just to say that it looks nice and neat now, and it's obviously easy after we've run this course for a number of years to say, oh, this is how we did it, but it was really complex and probably the most challenging course design experience I've had in my years as an academic. So I'll hand over to Amanda now to talk to you a little bit more about the course learning outcomes.
Well, thanks, Elissa. And yeah, it was challenging but fun. So yeah, it was messy. There were a lot of iterations over time in terms of moving the pieces around on the table. But I think having those larger goals and the challenge in mind as we were doing this helped keep us focused as we went into the details. And there's so much that could have gone in here, but we also kept recognizing that, hang on, this is an online course. This is for first year students. They could be psychology or they could be elsewhere. And we want to keep that thread of hear about it, see it, and then do it. And then they also need to be assessed. So that's where these course learning outcomes came from. And we thought, okay, well, what are the key things that we really want students to get out of this course that we want to assess them on as well? So there was a lot of extra bonus things that they probably learned and learnings that they'll take away, as you'll see later in the presentation, that weren't directly part of the assessment, but we wanted to get that constructive alignment through the whole course. And so that started with some real clarity around what we were doing with the learning outcomes that we were going to assess. So the first one there is really related to students being able to start describing those theoretical perspectives or the empirical evidence. As Elissa mentioned, this wasn't just a go sit under a tree and feel good with nothing else around it. This was, no, there's science, there's evidence behind this, and we want you to be able to connect the dots between all these different parts. And so that first one was around that describe level, again, remembering their first years, and they might have no psychological background at all coming in. The second was then taking what they'd learned about the theories and the evidence and those practices and thinking about how they relate to their own experience and strategies for implementing nature connection to support their well-being. So this was moving from here's the facts and then into, well, how might I start interrogating those and relating them to my own life and applying them. And then the last one is very much in that application space of the learning and saying, okay, now I need to apply it in a relevant way to a particular discipline or profession in ethical, legal, safe, and culturally appropriate ways. And we'll talk through what the assessments look like in a little more detail shortly. Oh, right now. So those were those course learning outcomes that were guiding us as we went. And we thought about, well, how are we going to do this? How are we going to assess students across this course? Should also flag that these online courses are 10 weeks long with no break. So we needed it to, we were wanting to introduce students to learning. Often this is one of the first courses that they're studying online. There's a layer of teaching them how to do the skill, how to do the assessment, and then to do it as well woven in. So there were many threads that we had to weave into this course. The first assessment piece was a reflective journal. And this was something that was staged across the course. As you saw in the pillars earlier, each week had an element of reflection and share back as an activity. But this was also framed in a way that was related to their reflection assessment, in that they had a couple of, I guess, mandatory topics that they had to reflect on as part of their reflective journal submission. But then they were arranged through the middle of the course that they could choose from. So if there were particular topics that resonated more with them, so if it was something about risky play and children in the outdoors, or if it was something about nature bathing for well-being and coping with mental health challenges, they could choose a couple of those topics from in the middle. The structure of the reflections were the same, regardless of the topic. There was a lot of, what was the theory? Can you explain it? How did that relate to what you noticed? What insight did you gain? So when marking the assignments, regardless of what they talked about, it wasn't the guts of what their reflection was insofar as, oh, did they do their nature connection right? It was more, have they gone through the thought process of this reflective practice for a first year, being introduced to the idea of reflective practice in their assessment? So that's what happened with that one. There was an early small tester of one entry where they got feedback, and that got given back to help them course correct if they were not quite getting how to do reflections. And then the remainder was submitted at the very end of the term in one submission, but they would have written it along the way. And then the other part that was a little more, gave students an opportunity to engage in the professional side or exploring how different professions might engage with nature connection practices, was to actually plan a nature-based activity. And so again, this had a bit of a template structure to the document that had different sections that they needed to complete, but it asked them to sort of put the hat on of a future profession that they might want to be. Some chose clinical psychologist. They were very keen to go there, but many others, having seen some of the different professions that had been presented to them through the different weeks, tried on some different ideas. And in some of the student feedback, there were students going, I never knew that there were opportunities to do work in this kind of way and work with the community in this way, etc. So it was really exciting to see them starting to branch out and have a go at testing out what it would look like, what's involved in planning these kinds of activities for different audiences, whether it's kids, teenagers, elderly people in the community, adults, you name it. They had a go at it, and it was really fun to see how they put that together. Next slide, please, Bri. So again, just reiterating, we wanted the experience of this course, both in moving through the weeks of the new material, but then also in engaging and completing their assignments, to be very much about the hear, see, do philosophy. So they don't just find out about the evidence and theory. They go out into whatever nature they had available and they try it out. They read about different interventions. They learn from how different practitioners might do that, but then they had a go at designing their own. So that change in just, I don't know how often it happens for you, but I know when people tell me a thing and I go, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. As soon as I start to try and do it myself, it changes the way you think about it, and it can highlight bits that you actually don't understand fully, or it's just a different process. And so that was really great. And so, as mentioned earlier, we were many threads. We also wanted to start introducing these pro-environmental behaviours as part of, and show students how that can just be part of your everyday. It doesn't have to be big signs, picketing, protesting, all the rest. Absolutely, they can. And many of them did talk about that. But even small things collectively matter. And then just down the bottom, seeing that we've had about 887 at last count across 2021 through to 2025 of all the different deliveries. So from a range of different disciplines. Now, Elissa mentioned earlier on about this concept of psychological literacy. The way this is conceptualized, it has sort of 3 levels or 3 domains. Personal, which is where you might take that psychological knowledge, theory, practice, and think about how that relates to your own life. Professional is that relevance to different employment contexts, being able to articulate how you can use that knowledge in those different contexts to different employers. And then that broader circle, which is that community and societal. So how this knowledge can be applied and shape and improve community and societal challenges. This course mostly focused on the personal. Again, thinking back to this is first year, could be first course, fully online, and the safety considerations within the psychology teaching space, going, well, if they started applying some of this theory and knowledge to their own lives, we're not psychoanalyzing people. We're not going, it's doing things for your own well-being. That's pretty safe. And if they start telling their friends and family, also pretty low risk. And if they take that into their workplaces, put a plant on their desk, encourage people to go for walking meetings outside, also pretty safe. So that was what we wove around it as well. Just drop those little hints and suggestions to students. Okay. Next slide. Beautiful. Okay, so the last bits that I just want to talk through briefly is speaking to this idea of how do we evaluate this and how did this grow from, we designed this course and we were really excited and the early iterations seemed to be going really well. We thought, well, how are we going to evaluate this? How can we initially start evaluating for continuous improvement of the course, and then thought, actually, how can we grow this? We're noticing this is having a really positive impact on students. Bree was noticing students reaching out or putting on their reflective Padlets and so on, really quite impactful experiences. And we thought, well, hang on, there's really something here. And so over those subsequent years, we started off with a bit of proof of concept in 2022 and gathered some bits of data that we could, obviously seeking appropriate ethics approvals along the way as this grew, and looking for, well, what data was already being sort of collected as part of the course, what is already available to us, and then getting students informed consent as we were moving through. So 2022 was using some class aggregate scores and some of the questionnaires that they were doing as part of the course itself to do that sort of pre and post in relation to wellbeing, nature connectedness, and a few other measures that we'll talk through in a moment. And then we saw some patterns emerging and we thought, well, actually, okay, let's reach out in 2023 and dive a little deeper. So then we had some surveys across multiple cohorts looking at, well, how has this impacted you beyond the course? Have these learnings persisted? Have you taken on board in that one course and then carried those behaviours forward? There were some student work samples, some focus groups. And then we started to look into psychological literacy more intentionally in 23. And then next slide, please, Bree. In 2024, we put a lot more structure around this too. So that's when we started to dive a little bit deeper into some matched pre and post course measures. As I mentioned, there was nature contact, nature connection, and then the subjective wellbeing measures as well. So with these validated scales, we then had the pre and the post, then could do a different kind of analysis and exploration on that data. And then some self-report measures of psychological literacy development and self-reported pro-environmental behaviours of students too. And so as we started to compile these different pieces of evidence, it started to paint this really interesting picture of the impact that this course was having on these students, both in the immediate term while they were studying, but then that it had persisted too and had started to share beyond. So, and that's sort of what led us to the AAUT citation application pathway, and then being able to share this course with lovely people such as yourselves. So we're a little bit excited about it. I think that's the end of my bit, and handing over to Bree now to talk through some of what we found.
Thanks, Amanda and Elissa. So yeah, I was lucky enough to be the facilitator of this course for 5 iterations. So it did run twice a year as well, which did mean we're able to collect data a bit quicker than some of the other way that we teach as well. So as I guess Amanda said, we collected a lot of data across different years. And so today we're just going to present some of what we found and the different levels of psychological literacy that we found. So overall, though, we did find that 90% of students did report that they felt their psychological literacy increase, so sort of that self-report. But we will dive into what we found at the personal, professional, and community levels as well. It was quite interesting in terms of how students engaged with nature. It was a bit of a mixed bag regarding whether the time spent in nature increased. For some students it did, for some students it didn't. Probably also worth noting as well, a lot of the time we were teaching this course was in the middle of COVID, so that was kind of an additional interesting element to this as well. But what we did find is how students engaged with nature changed. A lot of students became a lot more intentional in their the way that they spent time in nature. Some of these dot points here are specific activities we actually implemented throughout the course. So things like sit spots and nature journaling. And we saw students, continue to do that beyond what we told them to do in the course. But then we also did see a lot of students sort of talking about hiking and being really mindful in nature. And also we did have quite a number of students that had children themselves, and they talked a lot about how the time they spent with their children in nature changed as well. In terms of the psychological connection to nature, so this is what we measured using the nature relatedness scale that Amanda mentioned before. We did find that this significantly increased across our student cohorts. And we also did find that over 90% of participants reported, again with a self-report, how they view and how the way that they viewed and related to nature changed as well. So what was quite cool with some of these results is we found the results change on scales, but also the way that students self-reported matched as well. And we had a lot of open-ended responses in the survey, and we also, as Elissa said, we had Padlets and things, so we got some really great quotes throughout that really brings to life some of these results. Also, in that personal domain of psychological literacy, we saw increases across the board in terms of different wellbeing subscales. And so you can see there the dark green line are the pre, and the spotted green line is the post there. So we're really pleased to see that significant increase across all of them. And again, I think particularly interesting given not only, as Elissa said earlier, not only did we know that a lot of our higher education students were experiencing stresses, but then we went into COVID as well. So we had this added element of stress. And so to still see these results was really pleasing. Also, as I said, we didn't just collect quantitative data, we collected a lot of qualitative data. We were really interested in the students' perspective themselves. So how do they think that their well-being was impacted throughout the course? And we had a whole range of different benefits that were reported. So, sort of around increasing mood, decreasing anxiety, being more mindful in general. We saw a lot around cognitive replenishment. I know also students in particular said when it was a stressful time of the term, big assessments or exams and those types of things, they did feel like they were able to replenish themselves quicker after some of the skills from this course. And some other, around just feeling happy and gratitude for nature in particular, feeling less sad and angry, again, particularly pertinent during the COVID era, and greater purpose in life as well. So some really cool results throughout. And again, as I said, students were very generous in the quotes that they provided us, and a lot of them did provide some really lengthy explanations of this course as well. So I won't read them out verbatim, but again, things around, opportunity to de-stress, really understanding that they have access to nature, because that was one aspect of this course as well. We weren't telling students to go out into national parks or those types of things. It was really about how can they find nature around them. And then, also at the bottom there saying that it was a real game changer around them soothing their anxiety. So what we were also able to do in terms of that personal component of psych literacy is we sort of have developed a toolkit of how students can really manage their personal well-being, not only at university, but because this was a first year course and a lot of our students were first year students, we did kind of focus on really equipping them with how they can use these skills throughout the remainder of their studies. But then we also looked beyond the university element as well. And we broke these down into the physical, cognitive, and social elements, and able to sort of show the increases across these different capacities for students. Then if we move beyond that professional component of psych literacy, as Amanda said, that's really where we focused this course and where we focused a lot of the data collection, but we did find some interesting results in the professional and community aspects as well. A lot in the professional was really around people or students being able to make some really small changes. A lot of our students, because they were online students, a lot of them are already working part-time or full-time in careers. And we did see a lot of them saying that they, as Amanda said, they were bringing plants to work. They were encouraging, their manager to let them have meetings outside. And we were seeing this translated in real time, which was very interesting. A lot of students were saying that they were doing this as the course was going. And then I guess beyond applying this in their current roles, this course also opened up the perspective of how students might be able to engage in future careers as well, and students sort of reflecting on how they had no idea that there were aspects of nature therapy or those types of things that they could actually look at going into post-graduation. And so at that community and a social level of psych literacy, we did see that 64% of students reported pro-environmental behaviour increase, which is quite high in terms of when we look at other pro-environmental behaviour research. 64% is quite a high number, which is great. And again, students were able to reflect and really unpack that there is this reciprocal relationship between nature. And a lot of students did reflect on how they've learned about all the benefits nature can give them, but then that they also need to be giving back to nature as well. So again, just some really nice quotes that some of the students provided. I think that second one in particular, really kind of shifting that perspective around not only taking from nature, but really replenishing back what nature gives to them as well. And as I mentioned, we had quite a number of students in our course that are parents themselves. And there was a really big shift, particularly in this cohort, around how they engaged with nature with their children. And a lot of these students really reflected on how not only did they see benefits, but they were seeing benefits in their children as well. And what's particularly interesting about this finding is we didn't specifically measure or ask about this. It wasn't sort of part of our data collection, and this came through really organically, that those students that had this opportunity. And important to say, it wasn't just parents either. We did have other students say they were taking their niece and nephews or their friends out, but kind of really seeing the relevance of nature at that children level as well. So that was a little bit of a run through of some of the results, and I'm going to hand back over to Elissa to finish off.
So in terms of our reflections on what worked, and this came through really strongly across those different sources of data that we collected over the years and student feedback too, they really loved that close connection between the theory and research evidence and their own personal experience. So they felt that it made the learning so much more concrete and tangible and easier for them to understand because there was that experiential component for them. The context for application of learning, we also got really good feedback in this course around nature. And as Bree said, we talked to them about, obviously, we're a part of nature. We talked about embracing our nearby nature, you know, our suburban and urban nature and those kinds of things too. So we were looking at nature in a broad sense. And students therefore felt that they could very directly apply their learning in a way that enriched the learning experience for them. And we've tried to teach students reflection in other courses too. And sometimes they've found it harder when what they're trying to reflect on is more abstract. And so they really liked the fact that they could get out into nature, they could experience things, and then they could practice that skill of reflection on something that they had, you know, personally experienced too. So they liked nature as an environment for fostering a lot of these early academic skills that we want students to build as well. Yeah, and students did give us that feedback that this actually had a huge impact on their lives. And I think as educators, you know, that's what we want to achieve more than anything. We want to design courses that have a lasting impact and go beyond the content, you know, something that students will hopefully take a little bit with them moving forward into their lives and yeah, impact on them positively. So in terms of insights and implications, with my psychology discipline hat on, I guess, we want to continue to challenge that historical training model in psychology and say that we can actually build psychological literacy early. We can do it from first year. We can also do it in online and remote courses if the curriculum's designed well. We can teach psychological skills to both psychology students, but also students from other disciplines, because the science of human thinking and behaviour isn't just relevant to students that are potentially pursuing studies in psychology. It's also relevant in almost any job role and profession in the future. We do think where and how you teach students to apply psychological knowledge and skills matters. And as Amanda said, we put a lot of thought into safety and the appropriateness of what we were teaching students and how they could apply that. And nature connection is a great starting place, because you're really looking at you know, how can we improve our relationships with the natural world? That's a safe, positive kind of outcome. And we were very much looking at the positive side of the wellbeing spectrum. So we weren't encouraging students to look at treating or managing psychological distress. We were very much looking at how do we enhance wellbeing? How do we support flourishing? How do we foster a greater sense of connection and belonging and those kinds of things? So it was very much around protective means to enhance wellbeing rather than psychological distress. And as we said, we were able to support student wellbeing during their studies, which is really important for academic success and progression and those kinds of things. And also hopefully made a small positive improvement in terms of their relationships with the natural world and desire to protect and care for our planet. So yeah, our insights are that it can be done. It was tricky to pull it together, but we've had some really encouraging feedback over the years in terms of the impact of this course and yeah, really believe strongly in this kind of experiential learning format and trying to teach students skills for life during their university studies. So thanks, and happy to answer any questions that might come up.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Let me spotlight myself as well. It was so great to hear from you three about this. Fantastic work. And yes, there's lots of applause there coming through in the emojis. So well done. We do have one question in the chat at the moment. So for anyone that is watching that would like to add some more questions into the chat, please do feel free. But we have one there from Rowena talking about if I wanted to promote studying outdoors to students in a science course, not psychology, what sorts of science and research would you be suggesting that they refer to quickly convince students of the benefits to them?
Did you want to take that, Brie, or do you want me to?
Yeah, I can have a go at it. I think it's a really good point. I work in environmental science now, so I'm outside of the psychology world in terms of teaching now. I think actually a lot of the science that is included in this course would still be really relevant to other science areas. And I think maybe it's really around kind of what Elissa mentioned at the start. I think even our students initially maybe thought that they were coming into a bit of a fluffy course. And then as soon as they came into it, they realized there was actually fun, like there was a lot of science backing it. And so I don't think it's necessarily around having to change the type of science referred to, but maybe it's around how you pitch the course to science students and maybe really emphasizing that it is science first. And then the practical and reflective application second. I think that's how I would go about it. I don't know if Amanda or Elissa want to add in on that.
I think the experiential stuff is helpful too. So in other courses, even outside of this, we have had students take a class outside. So even having them take the class outside, experience it, and then go back and unpack the science. And so sort of starting from, what did you notice? How did it feel? Did you, because often when you get students outside of a traditional classroom, they'll be like, oh, actually, I didn't feel as tired as I usually do, or like it was easier for me to pay attention. And then you can link that back to some of the theories around, you know, reducing stress, or attention restoration theory helps students to see that when we're in natural environments, our brain is processing information in a different way. And it's a softer, more kind of mindful fascination rather than the effortful processing we're often required to do when we're spending lots of time on screens and those kinds of things. So yeah, I think sometimes having them do it, talk about what they noticed, and then linking it back to theory can be a nice way to help them build those connections too.
Yeah, designing it in and a bit of learning by stealth. So you kind of don't pull it out in front of students to go, oh no, I don't want to do that. Especially if you know your students and you know kind of broadly how the cohorts think about things or how they approach things. Yeah, doing what Elissa and Bree said of sneaking it in, just designing it into your curriculum. It's everyone's doing it. It's not an opt-in. It's just everyone's going to do it. We're going to go. We're going to give it a try. And then once you're on that path, it's much easier for students to then go become curious and then follow that a little bit further. And then you can add more to it. And that can be a way of just, yeah, then you get the buy-in and it's more likely to persist. But yeah.
Excellent. We've got quite a few questions coming in now. So, Bree, I might have you answer this one. Alison is wondering if staff teaching the course also noticed any benefit from interacting with these concepts.
Yes. Oh, that's such a good question. Definitely. Again, I think in particular, because when I first started teaching this, it was during COVID. And so we even really implemented things like all of the drop-in Zooms that I ran while I was teaching. I would run those outside myself because it was one way that I could kind of be outside and during COVID as well. And so I definitely found my own, I think even though I knew a lot of the science behind this, even I was surprised by what I learned during the course, but also really fulfilling to have the students actually, you know, some of the quotes and things like that in particular was very fulfilling as well.
Fabulous. Elissa, this might be a question for you. Jessica's pointing out that they've wanted to run a subject like this for a while, but the psychology undergraduate landscape is quite unstable. So do you have any comments on the longevity that you can perceive for this kind of subject?
Absolutely. It is really tricky, Jessica, obviously balancing with accreditation requirements. I think one of the reasons we were so keen to gather the evidence around this course too was to show that it's not just a nice, fun, go and spend time outside in nature. We're actually supporting student well-being, which if that's not a goal of psychology education, it should be. But also the strong focus on psychological literacy. So we're using nature connection as a powerful means of developing really important academic skills around evidence-based for practice, around building connections between theory and application. We're teaching students skills in reflective practice. So I think it's keeping the learning outcomes aligned to some of those core academic skills and professional standards as well. So we're obviously in the same boat where we know our curriculum's about to undergo huge changes, but we'll continue to advocate for the value of the course and hope we can continue to find a space for it within our curriculum. And there was also a comment just around, did we talk about climate anxiety at all? We do talk about it just a little bit towards the end of the course as something that gets picked up on in that specialist psychology course that I mentioned we have at third year too. So we do focus, I guess, a little bit more on the positive side of human-nature relationships in this course, but obviously acknowledge that human relationships with the natural world are leading to a lot of undesirable outcomes at the moment as well. We know that our climate is changing, and we know that particularly students of psychology are going to need to respond to those changes in the future and increasing levels of climate-related psychological distress. So we do start to introduce eco-anxiety, eco-grief, solastalgia, and the role of psychologists in addressing some of those and thinking about kind of self-care strategies as well for those that are working in those spaces. But it's just a very brief kind of touch on, and then to be built on in more advanced courses later in the degree.
Just on that one note, and hi Jess, it's nice to see you. I think one thing that I'm really interested in, and it kind of goes to that question before about how to get other sciences involved as well. I'm quite interested in the application of some of the skills we used to mitigate some of the eco-anxiety. Like especially I think about my enviroscience students now, they come into a degree and they hear a lot about all of the things going wrong with the environment, and whether actually being able to implement these even in small scales is one really practical way that we can equip those students with some of that mental well-being as well. So I think that's an interesting maybe application of some of what we found.
Great. There's a few questions in a few different directions around the sorts of activities that either that students were doing or that you did within classroom, within class time in terms of outdoors. So maybe Bree, if you can speak a bit to that about, how you went about organising those outdoor teaching activities, or what it was that students actually did outside and how they reflected on that.
Yeah, so in terms of, because this is a fully online and asynchronous style of teaching. So we did have regular Zooms, and this kind of taps into, there was a question as well around opportunity for students to connect to peers. So we did run regular Zooms each week. It's not compulsory, but students are able to drop in. And although it wasn't mandatory, I really encouraged those Zooms to be done outside, and a lot of students did uptake that organically. And then the other way that there was sort of that peer connection in terms of actual teaching was really on things like the Padlets that Elissa mentioned. So students were able to essentially each week, they provided reflection of what they did that week, what activities they did that week. And the way the Padlets work is it's also up to students if they want to be anonymous or not on those Padlets. And so some students were able, I guess, to choose that way. And we saw a lot of students reply to the Padlets, and that was a way that they connected as well. But I'll let Amanda or Elissa speak to what the actual activities that we implemented for the course were.
I think as we mentioned, the design was fully online and they could be anywhere. So you could have a student in the heart of the city. You could have a student completely rural and remote on a farm in the middle of nowhere, and everything in between. And so one of the, I guess, decision gates that we went through with any of the nature-based activities that we wanted to weave into the course was, could they do this anywhere? So part of the kind of the subtext of the learning about what does it mean to be in nature through the whole course was, you don't have to go to a national park. You don't have to go to a pristine beach where you can't see any other humans. You don't have to completely remove the human element. You look around and you go, well, what nature is near you? So that bit of a reframe. So then some of the activities were going to those places and being in them. And so some of them were like the journaling, the sit spot. So there was some structure to that. Some were going for a walk. Some were, whilst going for that walk, noticing certain things, being mindful of certain features of the environment you were in or what have you. So it was all sort of revolving around whatever nature you have available to you. See if you can go do this thing. And while you're there, notice in this way or document in this way. Maybe you're sketching, maybe you're drawing, maybe you're writing poetry, maybe you're taking some photos, maybe you're playing some games, maybe you're collecting bits of stuff off the ground, rocks, sticks, leaves, what have you. So I don't know, Elissa, if there's anything more specific you can think of.
I think a couple of the early ones we started with, which might be nice, starting points if you're teaching other courses. One we did was a simple gratitude in nature practice. And so there's a lot of, obviously, a lot of science and research that's looked at gratitude as a helpful wellbeing practice. We looked at gratitude in nature. So, spend some time in a local natural environment, find a few things you're grateful for. It might be, a flower, a color, something that reminds you of a memory, those kinds of things. So that was a very low stake entry for students in terms of engaging with nature and mindfully spending time in natural environments. The sit spot practice is really similar too. It's very much about just being present, being still, being in your body. And again, if we think about a lot of psychological distress, obviously comes from being in our head, worrying about what has happened, what might happen, rather than being still in the present moment. And we got a lot of feedback from students that they struggle sometimes to engage in mindfulness in indoor environments because their thoughts are still too busy. But when they're in nature, there's a lot of sensory stimulation, and that seems to help them to just be still and present and notice. A sit spot is also about spending time in the same bit of nature, and often you'll find that the layers of noticing increases the more time that students spend in a particular place. Like, oh, I walk past this place every day and I never noticed before that there's this particular flower or this bird comes at the same time every day, or I never appreciated this particular thing before. So and again, that fosters belonging, connectedness, all of those kinds of things which we want. So I'd say those are a couple of nice easy entry points, and they all come from there's a Miles Richardson and colleagues have a 5 pathways to nature connection framework they use. So we connected to those as well in terms of the different experiences that we offered. They've sort of linked into different elements of those evidence-based pathways for psychological connection to nature.
Excellent. There is another question that I wish that we had time to get to around Indigenous psychology being incorporated. I know, Elissa, you were mentioning that it wasn't just the Western science, but also the traditional ways of knowing, doing and being that were incorporated into this course. So I hope that we are able to perhaps speak more about that in ongoing ways, or read about it as you publish on these efforts and all of those kinds of things. But thank you so much for everyone for being here. Thank you for asking your questions and prompting further discussion here. And thank you to the 3 presenters as well. And if you are watching this recording on our YouTube channel, hello, and thank you for joining us there as well. We hope that you have a marvelous rest of your day. And yeah,